I want to welcome to Bring It In, True Hoops Daily show where we bring some basketball related people who love the game, people who coach or work in the game to talk about it. But we're starting a little bit differently today with some sad news. Henry won't be with us today, our leader. His dad passed away yesterday, and he had been ill for quite a while. Dr. David Abbott, who lived in England, but had visited here often to see his son. And things we thought were taking a turn for the better. Just on Tuesday, Henry told me, he called me Tuesday late afternoon and said, my dad's in the hospital, but he sounds okay. We think he's feeling better. He had been dealing with lung cancer for 5 years. It took a bad turn yesterday, and we lost him. So Henry is with his family today. I don't think they can go over there. I imagine we'll know a lot more today, but certainly this show we're dedicating to Team Abbott, as I like to call them, and Dr. David Abbott was an amazing, amazing man. And our thoughts are with the Abbotts today. So, but we're going to push on. We're incredibly fortunate that we have Coach Dwane Casey from the Detroit Pistons with us. Coach Casey, as anyone watching this show would know, is a former NBA Coach of the Year and a brilliant coach who has spent a lifetime in this game. And we're going to try to visit with him on a lot of different subjects. Remember, if you look at the bottom of your screen, you can send in questions. And I've got a lot of questions for Coach. But if you've got some, you're welcome to send them in, and I'll see if I can squeeze them in. So, Coach Casey, good morning. How are you today?
Good morning, David. How you doing, buddy?
We're doing great. So I was watching Wednesday night 2 weeks ago. I had your screen. I had your game on. The Utah-Oklahoma City game was on mute. And I didn't understand why the game wasn't starting. And the teams were playing. So first of all, I want to know, Coach, how is everyone in your family doing? And then if you could give me a rundown of just what it was like in those chaotic few hours after you played Philadelphia on the road.
Well, David, it was amazing because, we were playing the game and had no clue. And it's probably about, we were getting spanked, we were young and, we were trying to develop the young guys. And so it was going to be a challenge to beat Philadelphia anyway. So Embiid plays, but it was about the third quarter, and the game was kind of going back and forth. And so our trainer comes to me and says, we have to get Sekou Doumbouya off the floor. Rudy Gobert just tested positive, and I said, "What? What are you talking about?"
Right.
I'm thinking about transition defense and all this, so it didn't occur to me what had happened. So I take Sekou out of the game because those two had hung out after our game when we played Utah on Saturday.
Oh, wow!
So everyone thought, "Holy crap! Let's get him, out of the game, get him away from the bench, get him back in the back, away from the team."
Yeah.
So I took him out of the game, and so Sekou goes out to the back and everything, and so we get him away. So after the game, the decision was made that the season was finished, and so all these things were kind of running through our minds. So I brought the team in. We brought the team and had a team meeting after the game and said, "Look, Rudy Gobert has tested positive. We're going to have to be in quarantine because of the fact that we had played and possibly been exposed to it." So I was trying to explain, David, to the rest of the team what the next few days were going to be like. And on top of that, the season being, suspended, so to speak. So it was a very surreal moment. I've never experienced anything like that as a player or as a coach, to have to, stand there and say, "Hey, the season's over," in the middle of the season. So there's no manual, there's no playbook or technique to teach that or to talk about that. So it was surreal. So, but that's how we learned about it. And going into that, Christian Wood, I think it's public knowledge, so I'm not speaking out of school. Had said he had a sore throat, but no symptoms, no headaches, no fever, no nausea, nothing. So nobody thought anything about it. Matter of fact, I teased him and said, "You probably have the Embiid flu. You don't want to play against Embiid." But he goes out and gets 32 points that night.
Right.
So we go back. He gets tested. I think anybody else who thought they wanted to get tested,
Yeah.
was tested, and so everyone come back negative, as far as the tests were concerned.
Everyone but him. I read yesterday that he's completely asymptomatic now and is fine.
Yes, he's doing great. He, talk in great spirits, talking to him, playing a lot of video games, while he was in quarantine like everyone
Right.
else. So, but he's doing great. No symptoms, no fever. So he's doing A-okay right now.
Were
So
you in touch with him a pretty good amount during these last couple? It's been 2 weeks now. You're a free man. Your quarantine's over.
yes,
Did you
yes.
talk to
No,
him a lot?
I was in close touch with him, with most all our players, but
Yeah.
really with Christian, to make sure, him being a young kid and being single, and
Right.
so we made sure we set up a food delivery service for players who wanted it. Our own, our general manager and President Arntellum put together a package for all the players. So you wanted to make sure he was getting food, eating properly, and also too, our training staff did a good job, David, of making sure that they would take the guys all of our temperatures just to see if anyone had a spike in temperatures
Right.
and that type of thing, which is probably the first sign of the virus. So our organization did a good job of checking in, checking on us, and I was trying to be, as a coach, check on our players and stay in touch.
That's encouraging. Unfortunately, your quarantine's over. You can't really go anywhere. I don't know if Michigan's on lockdown, but
Right.
pretty much we're supposed to stay home. What have you been doing these 2 weeks? I listened to Steve Kerr the other day on a podcast, and he said he's watching a couple college games a day, doing a lot of family stuff. What have you been up to?
Well, again, I hadn't had a chance to be around my family. I don't think Steve and those guys were on quarantine, but
Right.
I had to stay 6 to 8 feet away from my kids, my family. They were here because their school was canceled.
Right.
My first couple of nights, I stayed in a hotel away from them just to make sure, because they were still in school, and I just didn't want to take the chance of being around them. But
Sure.
after their school was finished, I maintained the social distance from them and that type of thing, David. So, but again, the last few weeks has been crazy in the fact that I watched, the last few of our games, trying to
Yeah.
figure out, how to get our team better, whatever. You change some things, try some new things. I know the last couple of weeks we've been playing a lot of zone, 3-2 zone. So I was looking at different examples of that. And then watching a lot of college basketball. Watched a lot of the prospects that possibly could be coming out
Right.
or in the first round, where we may be in that area. Just trying to get a grip on the draft, just in case the draft is going to happen, if it does happen in June.
Yeah, and I want to get to the draft too, but I wanted you to help me dispel a myth. I deal with a lot of pro players as well, all over the world. Most of them don't have gyms in their house. Everyone thinks that they're home working on their game all the time. That's just not at all the case. I literally had to tell a player the other day, I said, Amazon.com, get an outdoor ball. Once you're clear, you can go find a court somewhere until they let you back in your facility. They've never had to worry about stuff like that, but they don't have a home gym. Wouldn't you agree?
No question. And again, the league closed all the gyms, so our guys can't go in the gyms.
Right.
So, it's funny you said that. Thon Maker,
Yeah.
Thon, he had a top floor parking garage on top of his building. So he was going up running sprints on the top of the building. I know Luke Kennard was telling me he was jogging. He has a park across the street that he goes and runs on and that type of thing, and works on his ball handling. But you're exactly right. Players have to be really innovative and creative to maintain their touch, their conditioning, and that type of thing. I know our strength coaches took some equipment over to different players' house. Derrick Rose, of all people, he told me he made a room in his house, his personal gym. He's got his bands, he's got a set of weights, so he does that there. And I know Blake Griffin has a weight room and workout room in his home. So some of the guys do, some of the guys don't, but we've encouraged him, and our strength and conditioning coach has given them different programs they can work on, as you said, David, without a regular gym.
Yeah, they got to find a way. I realize it's all guesswork. We have no idea if the season's going to come on, and if it does, how it might come back. Whether it's finish the season and then do the playoffs, we don't know that. But just being the experienced coach that you are, how long, let's say you were told, hey, we're going to go ahead and finish the season. What do you have, 16, 70 games left, whatever. How long would you want before you let those guys play a competitive game on a court?
That is a great question, because I think people think that players can just jump back in the arena and just go to work and one, mentally turn it back on, and then physically have a shock to their body. And we just talked about it. They haven't played competitive against other bodies or other players in the last 2 weeks. And that's tough. So if you bring them back too quick, jump back into it, you're really setting yourself up for injury as far as a player is concerned, a pulled muscle or whatever, strain, if you're not careful. So that's something I've been talking with our coaches about, our strength coaches about, of how we can ease them back into it. So I would say it's probably a good 2 weeks or a little bit more to get NBA bodies back in condition, back ready to go against competition. Because the worst thing you could do is bring guys back too quick, go back 100 miles an hour, and then pull something or tear something and have a catastrophic injury.
Well, something else. Henry and I interviewed a woman last week who's a brilliant lady, scientist and a writer and an athlete. And she talked about the importance, and this is something I've been saying to all my players globally and talking to my 18-year-old son. Your immune system goes down. It weakens when you overtrain, which athletes tend to do, and they don't think about it. But this is not the time we want a weak immune system. So if our players are being careful and not overdoing it, it's not like, and you know this well, Coach, Kobe helped change the culture for pro athletes. They almost never get out of shape anymore.
Right.
Like when your seasons end in April, I tell my players, if the ones that are in the playoffs, you got to take 14 days off. They're like, no way, 10 maximum. And then I've got to do something. They don't let themselves atrophy very much. But now is the time where they've got to be careful so that their immune system don't break down to become more vulnerable. And so now if all of a sudden they come back to playing, they're not even going to be in this typical shape that they are when you guys start preseason training.
No question. And that's a great point as far as the immune system. And I talked to, one of our doctors about that, and the fact that, guys are still susceptible. Make sure they make sure they keep the social distancing, washing their hands numerous times, because again, you guys still are susceptible, even though we're out of quarantine. Still have to be really careful. And as you said, if we come back in say the next 30 days or whatever the time length period is, and guys really get back in condition, start running, their immune system get down, then they're really susceptible to catching the virus again. So there's so many excuse me.
It's okay.
There's so many issues of coming back into the fray, into the training, that because we're in uncharted waters right now. So nobody really knows. All these are guesses of what will happen, how it will happen. But what I want to make sure is, if we do come back, David, and I trust Adam and the staff in the league office to make the right decisions. I'm sure they're going to talk to specialists and doctors to see what the ramifications are and how much time is needed. But I would much rather err on the side of coming back slow and building into it, because being off 30 days or how many days we're going to be off, and now the facilities are closed, we really have to be careful of how fast we bring guys back.
Well, Coach, I would tell you this, as someone who mentors a lot of athletes, I've always had an appreciation for your ability to see them as persons first. They're people first. They're young men, they're sons and husbands and fathers and brothers. And it's easy to forget that sometimes. And in our world, it's not. We know we deal with them every day on a very human level. So I just appreciate what you're saying. I want to just go back briefly. I know this won't be the most pleasant thing for you, but the season was hard. And I told you I listened to Coach Kerr the other day, and he talked about the stress of losing a lot of games when you're used to winning so much, which you are too. And yet there was some lightness to it where he didn't feel so much pressure. You guys were a little bit different. And well, just like him, he thought they might be competitive to start the season. Very quickly, Curry got hurt. That was that. You guys had to deal with Blake, not being himself. And later on, I'm going to get to you about Blake. Is one of my favorite players. Last season, what he did last season is one of my favorite stories ever. I want to talk to you about it. But so Blake is hurt initially, and then you guys trade Andre, and it's very clear what's going to happen. Kind of talk to me about what it was like coaching these young guys now, knowing the playoffs are not something we're worried about anymore.
Well, yeah, David, that's a great point. We went through like a started the season out like Steve said, thinking we were going to be very competitive. I mean, just thinking about the playoffs, getting up from the 8th spot, whatever it was, with a healthy Blake, Andre, Reggie Jackson, Luke Kennard, all the guys that we had coming back. We added Markieff Morris, who was going to be an excellent backup for us, and Derrick Rose, a healthy Derrick Rose. So we had a good group of talented players, thinking we was going to make a march. Then, like you said, Blake goes down, and people forget Reggie Jackson played the first 2 games and then missed the rest of the time. Luke Kennard goes down. And then Andre missed quite a few games because he had an eye infection. And so the injury bug just knocked us out. And again, it's not like in other teams, but for us, we lost our entire starting unit.
Right.
So then once the season goes on, we make a organizational decision in the fact, okay, this is a tough season, so let's start developing for next year, develop the young players, give them more minutes, probably more than a lot of them deserve, but just it was for the best for the future.
Right.
And so that's something we talked about from, Mr. Gores, our owner, on down, and made that decision. So it was tough, but yet and still it was fun for me because I enjoy coaching, I enjoy teaching. The games were not fun because you were getting spanked in the games, but I could see the growth in a kid like Christian Wood, playing. And the only disappointment I had was the fact that Luke Kennard being out. This would have been a great time for him to grow as a player. But it was great in practice. We had long practices, a lot longer practices than we would normally have at this time of year. But they were teaching, they were competitive, they were fun. As far as our staff was concerned. So it was frustrating, but except it brought a lot of joy from a coaching standpoint and a teaching standpoint that it's the same thing we went through in Toronto the first couple of years in Toronto. And what helped me also too, David, was the fact that I could see the light at the end of the tunnel because I saw what we had went through in Toronto. So it wasn't like going into it blind and saying, is this ever going to stop?
Right.
I saw the same progress with these guys that I saw in Toronto.
That's a great point. So I'm going to let you smile a little bit. 2 straight years, you've been able to see a very famous superstar player kind of resurge back in the limelight. A year ago, it was Blake, and then this year, Derrick. What was it like personally for you seeing Blake play the way he did a season ago?
That was for me one of the most enjoyable experiences because unlike him being a young guy, you saw a superstar who kind of went through different phases in his career, went through some injuries, but came back and saw a joy that Blake was having playing basketball. And for me, it was a semi-experiment, David, because it was a guy who we put the ball in his hands. He was not a point guard, but he led a lot of his usage rates was off the charts.
Yeah.
Because, he was bringing the ball down the floor. We were running pick and rolls with him. He was probably one of our best decision makers with the basketball. And then too, in the growth of his 3-point shooting.
Right.
He had confidence in his 3. He shot the 3. So watching Blake play in an all-around game was very rewarding to see that growth, to see the joy that he was having. We were competitive. We were in the playoff hunt and fighting each and every night. And he was a big part of that. And so that was a lot of joy to watch him play, a lot of fun, and to see him have a career year and make the All-Pro, the NBA All-Pro team.
Right. You had to let him take threes and miss and it's not something that's easy. A lot of guys aren't used to missing, but if you miss 6 of 10, you're an elite shooter.
No question. No,
they struggle with that.
Realize that because I get grief all the time. Why are you letting them shoot all the threes? Well, analytics, and it took me a while, to be honest, David, to buy into that. Probably about 4 or 5 years ago in Toronto, having all the analytical data that I had, and And because, you know, being an old school coach, you said, well, let's get the ball inside, get the ball inside. Well, you know, common math, simple math will tell you that the threes are weighted heavier than the twos. And so develop that philosophy. So for me, David, as long as they're good threes, let's let them fly. And
Right.
see the guys work on them each and every day, developing the three-point shot. Now, the bad threes are the ones that are challenged and forced and step back with under duress. Those are not good shots. So,
Right.
you know, we don't encourage those. But to watch Blake play last year and really take advantage of the three-point line was a lot of fun to see.
So last year, Henry interviewed JJ Redick and asked him about JJ's kind of famous work ethic, and you know he will in the offseason especially. And Henry asked him about other guys that he's aware of that have just a killer work ethic, and he said no one touches Blake. He's
Yeah.
like he's a different animal. Did you see that too as a coach?
No question. My first meeting with Blake, I flew out to LA to meet with him and to see him. He had went to this junior college. He had rented this junior college, time at junior college, and he employed about 5 or 6 or 7, maybe more than that, David, high school kids, you know,
Awesome.
they're in the LA area to simulate situations, pick and roll simulations, how he would attack, they would rotate out. And then he was charting everything. So this showed me how serious Blake was, how dedicated he was to improve his game. And that was impressive for me to see a veteran player like that have this setup, had plays set up, had defensive rotation set up, so he could get a feel. And again, at this time, he was also coming back from surgery and from injury.
Right.
And, but he had this whole training regimen together to develop his game. And that's what I don't think a lot of fans see, is that type of dedication. And again, he brought some other development coaches in to work with him at the same time. So he had like a 2-hour time frame a day, each and every day, that he was putting himself through. And so JJ was right. I had never seen a veteran player work that hard.
You know, I always tell this story. You know, I have a long time relationship with retired player Kevin Martin, like
Right.
my child. I had him when he was 19, and when he was a veteran scoring 25 a game, I would have a lot of guys in my gym, and we'd have a summer workout, and then young guys, and then some veterans like him and Corey Brew, whatever, and then Lou Aldang, and then the young guys would finish, and the young guys would get right on their phones, all on social media. Kevin still doesn't have a Twitter account. None of those guys did it. Then the veterans, the guys who already made a bunch of money, between them, they were making hundreds of millions of dollars. They would then grab my assistants, and then they would start their extra shooting workout. And I didn't say a word for a while, hoping my young guys in the draft process, or maybe rookies or second-year players, they would realize what was happening, and they didn't. So finally I said, guys, you all want what they have, but here you are on your phones in July. Look what they're doing. Like, the veterans get it.
No question. And you mentioned another player too, along with Blake, you know, to see that drive, and I call it drive and grit. You know, a lot of players, David, in the NBA, and I'm sure in college and high school, say they want it, but do they have the drive? You know, and a lot of them say, I'm motivated. Yeah, okay, you're motivated, but do you have the drive and grit? And do you enjoy the grind? That's so important. And that's what I see in Blake. I see Blake last year, and even coming back this year, enjoying the grind, coming back from surgery, coming back from injury. That's not easy.
So
But
hard.
it's very hard.
Yeah.
Because, you know, and then again, you know, for, like you said, a veteran player, they've accomplished everything. They've made the money. They've got the big contract. So even for him, having that drive was even more important, or important to see for any young kid. And the
Yeah.
same, I'll say this about Derrick Rose. Same thing with him. You
Yeah.
know,
I want you to talk about Derrick. Talk about Derrick, because he obviously had I mean, there
yeah,
was a period of time when people thought he was done.
right.
So that's why I say you've had two guys that had amazing years when people thought they might be done, when they were once the best player. Obviously, they were number one picks.
No question. And that really motivated me. Had to be creative, because they, you know, once the season, the game started, they couldn't have the same practice schedule. You know, like Wilt famously said a long time ago, you either have me at 7 o'clock or, you know, I'm
Right.
coming to the gym once a day. So you want me at
Right.
7 or at 10. So But again, those two had a really legit reason to scale back in practice just because to save their body and
Right.
everything. But just to watch Derrick and Blake, I had an unfound respect for those two guys, the way they approached it. Derrick, each and every day, he had a stretching regimen that he has to go through to get his body, just to get on the court, to watch both of them, what they go through, just to get ready for practice, ready for games. It just gives me so much. I learned so much about, the dedication and how much drive those two had just to play the game. And again, with Derrick, he had some good days and bad days with his body, but again, he knew his body. He was on a minute limitation, but every minute he was on the floor, he gave 110% and really gave himself to the team and did what he had to do to try to help us win.
So our good friend Randy Shane is asking a question in our chat. He says, when you make the decision to play the younger guys more, do you tell them up front directly what's expected of them? And I want you to answer that, Coach, with the context of a guy like Derrick Rose, who it's not fair to say he should only worry about the young guys. He's trying to have a career year himself. He wants to still play. So how do you manage all of that?
Well, you have to have that conversation, and I had that with Derrick. Blake was already had his surgery,
Right.
so you have it with him. But you let him know that, look, we want to develop for next year. We're developing these young guys. We've given Sekou minutes, probably more minutes than any of the young guys deserve. But Derrick is such a pro. He understood. He said, Coach, I want to play. I want to win. And again, you never go in those situations saying, okay, we don't want to win. No. Every game we prepared, I coached the game, we played the game to win. Now, at some point, talent takes over, experience takes over, and you could see that happening, right? And that was probably as frustrating because you could see some of the mistakes guys were making were lack of experience mistakes. And so, but again, it's a part of the growth. But having a professional like Derrick who loved to play basketball, and that's another thing that you see in a guy like Blake and a guy like Derrick, veteran players, they love the game. I told them, don't tell the owner, they'd probably be in the park somewhere playing for free, but they love Derrick Rose and Blake Griffin love to play. And
Yeah.
so that's what he wanted out of the situation, to go out and to compete to win, but also to enjoy playing basketball and have an opportunity again for Derrick to play.
So you guys now have a situation where you're going to have a good draft pick no matter what happens the rest of this season. But we're faced with a pretty challenging dilemma of you're not going to maybe see these guys in person. Maybe not. Well, you can do an interview like this, which I think actually I've talked to agents about this. You better prep your players for these kinds of interviews because you may not be flying anywhere. You're almost for sure not going to see them play any more games or even workouts. In your long time experience, talk to us about what it was like meeting a player and then seeing him on your court with just one or two or three other guys compared to what you may have seen on film, and how valuable that was, and what might be missing now because you're not going to have that.
And that's a good point, David. And the fact that I'm a people person.
Yeah.
I go by feel. I feel like I can be around somebody for a little while and get a good feel. I think it's hard to fool me as far as talking to a young man to see how much he loves the game, how dedicated he is, and it's scary. And again, I know a lot of agents prepare their players and talk to them about conversations, in which they should, because some players come in and say things they probably shouldn't say, and boom, there goes the red light above his head. So, but again, it's very important for me to get a feel, more so than the workout itself, but to sit down after the workout and talk to the players and talk to them about their life, their upbringing, their family, their girlfriend, their school, their college coach, their high school coach. And after you talk to a player for about an hour or whatever, have lunch with him, you get a pretty good feel. Now, they may fool you on a couple things, but it's very difficult for me to fool them or them to fool me. Either way, but again, I get a good feel by those in-person meetings. I think the teleconference meetings, like you were saying, are probably going to be a thing of the future. My advice to the agents would be to prep them about how to handle themselves. I know last year, and not talking out of school. We had one visit with Tyler Hero. I was
Yeah.
very impressed with his teleconference interview on the computer, but it didn't get to touch him, didn't get to feel him. I'm from Kentucky, played in Kentucky, and he was from there, so I kind of watched his entire year, as a fan, as alumni. So I kind of felt like I knew the kid, but didn't know him.
Right.
So again, I think those in-person interviews are important, especially for the head coach who hasn't had a chance to go to the game, see him in person, touch him, feel him. But I think those conversations on the computer are going to be a thing of the future.
Yeah, I think it's probably likely too. One thing I really respect that you've done, Coach, is you've been able to take teams that I don't necessarily think before you got there played defense the way they could have. Doesn't mean the previous coach wasn't trying, just what didn't work. You've had some success with that, obviously. Talk to me about what is it that on a daily basis you can do? Forget about tactics, and just from a mindset, what are you doing to help people value that side of the floor?
Well, it's kind of simplistic, David. I know it, but it's who you are, what you emphasize.
Yeah.
And one thing that we emphasize each and every day is the defensive end of the floor. We probably watch far more defensive edits and tape, talk about defense. I know if you look at our practice schedule, it's probably heavy laden with defensive drills or something to do with defense. And, at some positions we were defensively challenged, whether it was lack of size, length, quickness. So we had to work on fundamentals defensively, and we did it almost each and every day. I don't think there was a shoot around or practice that we didn't work on the defensive side of the ball. Because again, like you said, that's probably the hardest thing for players to do, to go in the gym and enjoy defensive drills. And the first thing guys want to do when they go in the gym, you being working out guys, developing guys, and coaching, the first thing to do is want to go grab a ball to shoot. And so it's unnatural, but I tell our coaches all the time, and I know it's been my history, to make sure we do something defensively. We talk about defense each and every day, and it's a point of emphasis. Now, again, at some point, talent is a huge part of it, but I make it a priority. And we start our meetings out with defense. We start our film sessions out with defense. And because I think at the end of the day, you've got to have a defensive mindset. Even though you got to score a lot of points in today's NBA, you still have to have a defensive mindset to going into the game.
So one of my first ever students was a young man that you coached named Olumide Oyedeji in Seattle.
Yes.
And so you've been around in the pro game for, this was back in the early 2000s, maybe even 99.
It was in the 90s, late 90s.
Yeah, it might have been 99. How different, this is something I deal with all the time, how different is coaching defense now, even compared to then?
Well, David, I even go back further than that, back to the quadrants where you had to be in there. You couldn't be in it was illegal defense because you came out quadrants. So I will give David Stern so much credit for changing the game, the freedom of movement. I think it's a prettier game now. I think at the end of the day, you have to have a player to break the defense down one-on-one. But I just seeing the game then to now, there's much better ball movement, player movement, activity. I think the defensive three is still good, but it's more, the game is prettier now. It's more I think it's more enjoyable for fans to watch. So it's totally different now, because at that time you were trying to scheme out ways to utilize the illegal defense, to use your 2-9, to come across the line, to double team. And I would say George Karl was a master at coming up with defensive schemes, and learn those from him. But the game is so much different now, where you're teaching more man-to-man concepts, defensive help concepts, weak side concepts, much like we did in college. Base goes, crackdowns, rotations on the backside. All those things are similar to college basketball, more so than they were back before they changed the defensive rules.
And you're covering so much more landscape now. That's why it's so important to be long and agile, right?
No question. It's great. Length is so important in our game today, and versatility. Guys that can guard 1 through 4 maybe 1 through 5.
Right.
Certain situations, like what Houston's doing. So versatility is so important in today's game, especially for your 4 and 5 men. And we had a conversation earlier. Guys like Tracy McGrady, Vince Carter,
Yeah.
those guys were way ahead of their time in the fact they were long, athletic, could play multiple positions. Today they would be the small fours of the small fours, which, when they first started, probably people thought they were crazy to talk about that, but they're today's small fours.
Yeah, I'm gonna pick your brain a little bit on some old school talent you've seen, but I saw Vince starting at 15. Like he was the number one rated 2 guard coming out of high school. He played power forward at North Carolina, and he could play point guard easily. He saw everything. He was those versatile. That's when I would say this: if you can play multiple positions, you can defend multiple positions.
No question.
It makes a big difference. You understand the thought process behind it. The advantage of guys like a Joakim Noah and Anthony Davis that grew up as guards, they're comfortable moving their feet in space because they always had to, as opposed to the big guy that was always big, is used to only defending the paint back in those days. Now the game will change, but it's a big advantage of always used to guarding out in space.
No question. And again, I even go back to the days where we used to make fun of European coaches, practicing all the time, putting their big guys out on the perimeter.
Yeah.
What they got him? Why don't they put him down on the post down there and get him closer to the basket? But
Right.
now we're utilizing a lot of those same drills that they used in Europe years ago, making sure our big guys can play out on the floor and our guards can play inside. So exactly what you said, David. So that's how the game has evolved and changed, and our teaching techniques, our philosophies are much more in line today than ever before with European basketball.
We had my longtime assistant Ryan Pannone on yesterday. He's now the head coach of the Erie Bayhawks with the Pelicans. He's coached literally all over the world in Asia and Europe. And I think, in talking to the number of executives that I do, I think the experience of coaching overseas is very helpful, especially now that the game is so international. You coached in Japan, and I know you forged an amazing relationship there, probably more than one. How much did that help you prepare yourself to be an NBA coach?
Unbelievable. The first thing you learn is how to communicate through language barriers, and you get creative. And in a crazy about way, it helped me start communicating with players here in the States. So that's the first thing you learn to do: demonstrate, communicate. It was a great experience because, again, you go back to your roots, you go back to your fundamentals. I would say this: I wish I knew what I know now back then. As far as coaching is concerned,
we all say that.
You learn how to survive. You learn how to communicate. You learn so much more about relationships because you're in a confined. You're in a situation where you have to get to know people. You have to communicate to try to get across even more so what you're trying to teach. And so I learned so much about people, communication, relationships, probably more than basketball, David, as far as that experience was concerned. And, we went to the World Games. I think it was in 96 against a lot of teams, got our brains beat out. But now a lot of those players that are now executives with teams are coaching. And just to watch those young men grow up and evolve and become coaches and young men, and probably using some of the same drills we used back then. And so also, too, that time gave me an opportunity to spend summers with Coach Newell, Pete Newell. And it was just like an encyclopedia of basketball.
Right.
Just picking his brain, asking him about things, spending time with him, traveling over the country of Japan, doing clinics and stuff. Those were days and times I'll always cherish.
Yeah, I can only imagine. And some of those guys you coach are not young men anymore, and that's always fun, especially when they're from foreign countries and have such a different life experience. I want to ask you 2 more quick things, and we're going to bring in something we always do to finish it up. Regarding the Olympics, so we know they're postponed to 2021. Let's hope they go on in 2021. If the NBA does what is potentially they're going to do, which is delay the start of the season, maybe begin around Christmas time, play through the summer, that puts some of our best players at risk to then have to go right back to the Olympics. I've had 2 thoughts. One was, why can't we just one time do an 18 and under world championship for everyone and give all those older players just the time off? because every country's best players, typically the best teams, are in the NBA? Or do you just do it no NBA players at all? Team USA probably won't win if we have no NBA players, although we could, because no one else will have their NBA players except those European guys will be very, very good that play in the EuroLeague. What's your thoughts about the Olympics and the NBA? And do we have to win the gold medal every year?
Well, I guess I'm from old school. I think the funny thing, I think our players now enjoy representing the USA.
Yeah.
Really, since that Mr. Colangelo and Coach Krzyzewski, they did a great job of building that we against the world, the U.S. against the world mentality. Guys like Kobe, the older players that started, LeBron and those guys have made it a cool thing to do.
Yeah.
To represent the country. I had Kyle Lowry and to make it and DeMar DeRozan. And I just, in talking to them, they enjoyed, representing the USA. And like I said earlier, what you find out, David, is the fact that you find the players that love the game.
Yeah.
They're not doing this for money. They're doing this because, one, they love the game. They love the camaraderie that they have with the other USA players. So I think, it's showing their love of the game, demonstrated by representing the USA, even though it's taking time away from their families. They've done a great job of being able to take their families with them, making it a family experience going over there. So I'm of the fact that if they have the Olympics, the players that want to play, let them go. Because again, I think they're going to be somewhere playing basketball anyway, whether it's in Florida, down in Miami, at a gym in Miami, or in LA. So let them go and get that experience, represent the country if they want to do it. And I think we'll find out. You'll find that a lot of our superstar players are so driven and enjoy playing that they will do it.
I think they also, no question, they love playing with the world's best players. I wrote a book a couple years ago called Basketball is Jazz. And when you get the world's best players on the same court, not two superstars, but five, with
Yes.
five off the bench, they're playing the best jazz you can possibly play.
No question. And as the old saying go, game recognizes game.
Yeah,
They love being around each other. They love playing with each other. They learn from each other. And I can tell you this, when Kyle Lowry came back from the Olympics, he was a different man.
Yeah.
He's easier to coach. He's easier to talk to because he had seen how LeBron handled certain situations, how, Coach Krzyzewski was saying the same thing I did, but in probably a different way, but he was teaching the same thing, So from a coaching standpoint, I enjoyed when Kyle went, when DeMar went, and I'm sure now if Siakam has a chance to go, or if we have somebody from here in Detroit that have a chance to go, I think it's such a great experience for your players to go be around big time guys like a LeBron, like a Kobe. I've heard all the stories about players being around his work ethic, how he went back to the gym. Yeah. So again, I think again, it fosters, it breeds, it helps spread out the winning attitude throughout our country. When players have that experience, when they take the college players to go against the Olympians, I think they learn and take back the work ethic to their colleges or to wherever they're from. So we're doing this, we're kind of growing the game in a roundabout way by having those summer experiences in Vegas with our USA experience.
Yeah, you make a great point about the impact it has on certain guys. I think Lamar Odom won his Sixth Man of the Year award after playing for Coach K for Team USA, and I think it helped DeMarcus Cousins.
Yes.
I think that's a great point. Okay, one last thing, and then we're going to bring in Gerard for a question. Okay. So Judy, you can get ready for that. So Coach, I mentioned you before we went live. I go way back with Coach Leonard Hamilton. His season was incredible this year. He recruited at Florida State. He and my friend Anthony Grant, they probably had the two. I coached against Anthony in 1988.
Oh my goodness.
As high school JV coaches, and Frank Martin. Frank Martin at South Carolina and Anthony were on the same JV bench working with Shaky Rodriguez at Miami High.
Oh.
So Coach Hamilton recruited you to Kentucky. You guys won a national championship. You've been in this game many, many decades. Tell me, we all have these stories. Tell me the one prospect you saw, whether you were a player or a coach recruiting or even an NBA player, a young guy that blew you away more than anybody else.
Well, oh my goodness. Dwight Anderson. I don't know if you remember me.
I do.
Dwight Anderson. Matter of fact, Dwight's a distant cousin of mine.
Wow.
Grandmothers were sisters.
Wow.
He came to Kentucky, left and went to USC, but probably one of the most talented players ever to play at Kentucky that nobody ever talks about. I mean, he has probably more talent in his little fingers than a lot of players. Could go where he wanted to with the ball, could jump out of the gym. Coach Hamilton recruited him out of Dayton, Ohio. I couldn't believe some of the things that he did as a player, as a young man.
Yeah.
Other young man is a young man that I recruited to Kentucky, Sean Kemp, as a young kid.
I thought that's who you were going to say.
Oh my goodness!
Yeah.
I tell you what, those two players are two of probably the most talented kids. One, I was playing at the time in Kentucky when Dwight came in, but coaching Sean Kemp, the young Sean Kemp, was probably
From Elkhart. Was he Elkhart, Indiana?
Elkhart, Indiana, Concord High School.
Yeah, I
And
watched him play high school.
He was unbelievable. Could do what he wanted to do. Dominated. In pickup games, whatever it was. And again, just continued to develop. And I would say if he was playing in today's game, he would be able to stretch the floor.
Man.
We had emphasized the 3-point shot. He had the touch and feel to develop that, but could run the floor, handle the ball. As you mentioned earlier, David, he could guard 1 through 5, and offensively could play 1 through 5. So those two players are probably and I'm sure I'm missing somebody.
Well, you had mentioned Penny Hardaway to me. I saw Penny. I saw Chris Webber. Derrick Coleman, I saw out of Detroit, also was an amazing high school player.
I was going to mention Penny. Penny out of Memphis, Tennessee. I spent a lot of time in Memphis as an assistant coach at Kentucky. Penny goes in that group with Sean and Dwight as a talented young kid. And again, his game was way ahead of his time. The way he played at that time.
Yeah, he was amazing. Okay, so we have a friend of the show, Gerard comes on, and I'd always ask the question. It's tradition. So if we can get Gerard on here, he's got a great question for you, I assume.
All right.
Thanks, Coach. And thank you, Coach Casey, for this talk. It was really exciting.
Okay.
So you talked about earlier how you transitioned from adapting more of the analytics into your everyday, right? And we saw that for your teams in Toronto, which you've done the last couple of years in Detroit. How do you balance, though, what the numbers are telling you versus what your intuition, your knowledge, and your gut says, right? Like that example where the opponent's cooking your weak spot on defense and you have to get him out of the game, but you need him on offense because he's either going to space the floor for you or be part of how do you balance that?
That is a great question, Gerard. And the fact that as I mentioned earlier, my upbringing has been on the defensive end. In Dallas, I was, fortunate enough to be the defense coordinator for Coach Carlisle. So I have a defensive love of the game. But over the years, the game has changed so much. And I think David and I talked about it. The game has changed. In today's basketball, even though defense is very important, it's still there's a slant toward offense. You've got to be able to score. So that is probably my biggest struggle each and every day in practice, in games, as a coach, is that struggle between, I know we got to get stops, but I also know to win this game, we got to be able to score. So there's always that delicate back and forth with myself, with my coaches in practice. And I don't think that's ever going to leave, because I do know in today's game, you've got to be able to score. And how do you score in today's games? One, you either get to the rim or you shoot the three. And that's why Milwaukee is so good right now. They're probably the best I've seen in the last few years of forcing you into non-paint twos, in between shots, the inefficient twos of anybody in the league. They'll give you the threes, but they're going to force you into a lot of non-paint twos or mid-range shots, which is the most inefficient shots in today's game. So, but that's a daily struggle, Gerard. And I don't think I'll ever get away from that because I believe in defense. I was a defensive player growing up, but from a coaching standpoint, I do know I got to have maybe some non-defensive players in the game that are going to give up some. Again, that's a daily struggle that I think if you put a truth serum to a lot of coaches in the NBA, a lot of us have the same issues.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Go ahead, Gerard.
I hope that
No, I was
did
just
that
saying
answer the question.
Yeah.
That was wonderful. I see it all the time, and you're like, I can see you guys when I'm watching, either if I'm at the arena or whatever, just struggling. Like, I don't know what to do.
Right.
Like you're like pulling your hair out, like, got to get him off the floor, but I need this bucket now.
My thing is, Rod, as long as a player is pursuing, as long as he's giving it. Now, you can't be out there and be an Olay like a turnstile and say, okay, go ahead and score. I'm going to score. No, well, I don't believe in that. But at least make sure you have the proper rotation. Keep your body between the ball and the basket if you're a non-defender. And again, we've got to give you help. But again, give us some resistance. Make him take at least 2 dribbles or 3 dribbles to get to the rim, not a easy blow by. So those are the things that I'm encouraging to some of the guys that may be not as gifted defensively as other guys are. So that's something we're always teaching help. And as I mentioned earlier, we're playing probably more zone than I played since I was back in Dallas this year. And again, that's another way to try to encourage players. And I think Miami does a great job of this.
Yeah.
Of playing zone. Brooklyn does a great job of it. And and that's something, if we do start back this season, that's where we're going to experiment with a lot of different zones, different types of zones, to try to find a way to make sure we protect the paint first and then still get out to the three-point line.
Was Milwaukee the toughest team you played this year?
Yes, no question. I think they had their ups and downs, but one thing against Milwaukee is you're always trying to find a way to score. You're always trying to find a way to generate more three-point shots. And they're a great offensive team, but and people don't notice this, but they're long. I don't know exactly what their numbers are lengthwise, but as far as any team in the league, their length. And Bud does a great job of keeping his centers disciplined and protecting the rim. So you're not going to get to the rim. And again, they're going to use their length to run you off the three-point line. So they forced you in some very inefficient shots. And the other thing, they don't foul. And so you don't get an opportunity to get to the free throw line as much as you'd like to. So and Antetokounmpo himself is a problem. So you wake up thinking about that guy and how and that type of thing. So they're in the Eastern Conference, and there's some other good teams in the East. Toronto's good, Boston's good, Miami's good. But for me, I think right now Milwaukee is probably the most difficult team to prepare for in the Eastern Conference.
Yeah, I would agree. So, Coach, deeply appreciative of your time today. You were amazing. Most importantly, I'm really happy you're healthy and you're out of quarantine now. You can go hug your family. I keep telling, I'm living with my daughter and wife and son, but I'm not hugging the way I want to because they go to work. Both my kids work a little bit, so we've got to be careful. I just want all this to be over. But you enjoy your time now.
I want to say this, David. I think you've done as much for basketball as anybody over the years, as far as player development, talking the game, preaching the game, developing players, helping players, coaching the game, and now you're doing this. And I think we all, as basketball people, Gerard, you're a fan, and it sounds like a student of the game. The more we can talk about it, the more we can promote the game and teach the game the right way to young players, I think the better and the more beautiful the game will continue to be in college and also in pro basketball.
Oh, thank you so much for that, Coach.
Okay.
I agree that we need to communicate. We need to love the game and love each other. And on that, I want to say hello to Henry and his family. I love you, man, and look forward to talking to you. So thank you, Judy and Gerard and Coach Casey. We'll be back tomorrow at 11 o'clock with Grievous Vasquez. Yes.
Make sure you tell him I said hello.
I will.
I love coaching him.
I will. He was just in Italy for like 7 months doing rehab. Yes. And he was quarantined there. So we're going to get his story tomorrow, 11 o'clock Eastern time. We'll see you then to bring it in. Thanks, everybody.